welcome back. My name is Crystal and I love horror movies. And if you're looking for a fun, spooky, chill setting, I'm your girl. So on this channel, I do deep dives, reviews, thoughts, opinions, and ratings of whatever film or films or shows that we're talking about. There are timestamps on the bottom, so feel free to skip around if you'd like. Don't worry, I'm not gonna be offended. And once you finish this episode, let me know what you think. Comment, like, subscribe, you know, all the good stuff if you want to. So as you can tell from the title, we're going to be doing a deep dive into the 2009 film Triangle. We follow 5 friends who set sail and their yacht is overturned by a strange and sudden storm. A mysterious ship arrives to rescue them, and what happened next cannot be explained. Triangle was written and directed by Christopher Smith, and it stars Melissa George, Joshua McLover, and Jack Taylor. Liam Hemsworth also has a role in this film as well, and I remember when I started watching it, I had to look him up and be like, I know who that is. Also, that was my cat jumping from her tower onto the floor, so... So I recognize Melissa George from the Amityville Horror remake that starred her and Ryan Reynolds. She was also in the 2007 film 30 Days of Night. I really like Melissa George, and her character and the way that she played her character in this movie was really good. And I'm gonna touch on that a little bit later in the video, so as always, stay tuned. The setting for this film is in Florida. But this was also in 2009, so maybe it wasn't as bad as it is today. I don't know. I try not to go to Florida. If you're from Florida, I still love you, but I love you because you're a horror fan. So we're in Florida and we meet Jess, and she is a single mother to Tommy who has autism. And we learn throughout the film that she is a waitress at a diner, and the father is just not in the picture at all. So one of Jess's regulars at the diner, his name is Greg, and he invites her to go to a yachting trip with him and a couple of his friends. We also learn that Greg has invited Tommy as well, Jess's son. And we find out that the name of Greg's yacht is the Triangle because, of course. So Greg's friends, Victor Downey and his wife Sally, and Sally's friend Heather are all a part of this group. And they're all looking forward to this nice little yacht outing on a Saturday morning. But before leaving to go on this trip, we are introduced to Jess and Tommy, who are at home, and Jess hears her front door bell ring. But when she sees to go who it is, no one is there. We also see the sequence of events with Jess and her son in the beginning of the film, but there's music over it, so we're not getting the whole picture here, which is something to keep in mind. So the first inclination that something is off is that Tommy, her son, is not with Jess when she gets to the yacht. And she explains to Victor that Tommy is at school, but Victor's kind of confused because it's Saturday. But when Victor tells this to Greg kind of just brushes it off and explains to Victor that Tommy is in a special needs school because he's autistic. So we can see at this point of the film, which is not too far into it, that Jess looks a little downtrodden and she looks tired and she looks like she has a lot on her mind. So she decides to take a nap on the yacht. And while she's taking a nap, she has a nightmare about being washed up on the beach, but we don't really get any more context than that. We're gonna chat about it later, so stick around. So as a group is on their outing, all of a sudden, the winds completely stop. Now, I'm not an expert at anything that has to do with ships or sailing, but is there such a phenomenon as the winds just out of nowhere stopping? And then Jess spots a very ominous looking storm in the distance, and Greg explains to her that it is an electrical storm. So Greg then radios the Coast Guard. And while he is doing this, he picks up a distress call from a woman. And she's radioing for help, and she's telling him that someone is killing everyone. But before Greg can get her location, the call is cut off. So this electrical storm does cause the yacht to capsize. And then we find out that Heather is missing, so we have to assume that she died during the crash. wreckage. As the group is trying to figure out what the hell they're gonna do, they spot a very old passenger vessel coming towards them. And this ship is called the Aeolus. And it stops and it allows for them to all get onto the ship. But before they get on board, they all spot someone that's on this like upper deck. But once they board the ship, it is completely deserted. So while they're exploring the ship trying to find someone, Jess is telling Greg that she is having deja vu. So while the group is still trying to figure out what is going on in this ghost ship, we learn the ship is named after Aeolus. And in Greek mythology, Aeolus was the ruler of winds. There is a brief part of the film where Downey and Sally explain that Aeolus was the father of Sisyphus, who is punished to the underworld by the god Zeus, who forces him to roll a boulder up the hill for eternity. And when he nears the top of the hill, the boulder rolls all the way back down. Sally also goes on to explain that Sisyphus made a promise to death that he couldn't keep. So just keep that in mind because we're gonna revisit it later. So while the group is continuing to find any signs of life, they hear keys clatter down the hall. So when they go to find out what this noise was, and then we find out that the keys that were clattering were Jess's keys, which would be impossible because the keys should have sunk when the yacht was capsized. This is another inclination that something is very, very strange about this ship. She then convinces the group that these are actually her keys because there was a photo of Tommy on a keychain that matches the one that's around her neck in her locket. The group then makes their way into the dining hall area of the ship and they see that it is almost like set up for a party. There's like a stage with instruments on it, and there's like a buffet style table and it has all this fresh food on it. During this scene, there's also another clue that we get that something is off because Jess is looking at her watch and her watch says that it's 8:20. And then she looks up at the clock on the wall in the ship and it also says that it's 8:20. But we know that it's 11:30 because there's a conversation in the background. I have a theory on this whole thing, so once again, just stay tuned till the end. Jess then thinks that she sees someone, so Victor decides to chase after this person that Jess might have seen. The group then splits up and Jess and Greg hear something coming down the hall. Inside of a room, and of course the room number is 237, which is also Jess's house number that we saw in the beginning of the film. Now the significance of 237, if you are a huge horror fan like myself, I instantly knew that this was the room that was in The Shining. Inside this particular room though, in the bathroom, on the mirror, written in blood, is a message that says, "Go to the theater." So Greg is trying to make sense of everything and he tells Jess that sometimes crew members on ships like to play pranks and that they're all just getting pranked. But Jess is not convinced. And Greg tries to explain to her that everything is all in her head and that big ocean liners don't just appear out of nowhere. So up until this point, we are convinced that Jess is a good mom and that she just wants to get off this ship so she can get back to her son, who apparently is waiting for her to pick him up at school. So Jess storms off and she finds herself back in the dining room, but now all the fresh food that we saw from earlier is now all rotted and disgusting. Jess is then ambushed by a very bloody Victor, and he is essentially fighting her, and we don't know why. And the way that she kills him is by pushing her finger into a bloody hole in the back of his head. Jess then hears gunshots coming from the theater where she comes in, and she sees Greg dead on the ground with Downey and Sally around him. And then Sally attacks Jess, saying that she was the one who shot and killed Greg. Very confusing, I know. Just stay with me because it's just gonna get more confusing and then I'm gonna explain it all, okay? Then Sally and Downey tell Jess that Jess was the one who had initially told them to come to the theater. But before anything can be resolved, shots are fired again from like the upper balcony of where this theater is. And they all look up to see this masked shooter. And this masked shooter ends up killing Sally and Downey. So then Jess runs out of the theater. The masked assailant runs after her. And then when the shooter catches up to Jess, she is pleading with this person saying, "Please don't, I have a son." Jess is able to fight off the shooter and ends up pushing them overboard. But not before we hear the shooter say, "You have to kill them. It's the only way to get home." So this part of the film when the shooter starts talking, I was like, oh my God, that's Jess's voice. I was still very confused, so I continued watching, of course. And then Jess hears an old record player coming from a room on the deck, and it's the song called Anchors Aweigh. And this is where everything just continues to get so trippy and so confusing. Jess then hears screaming, and it's Greg, Sally, Donnie, Victor, and herself standing on top of the capsized yacht. So we realize that the person Jess and the rest of the group saw in the first time loop was actually Jess, like herself. This explains how the keys got on the ship in the first time loop, because she was already on the ship. Then we hear the same conversation from earlier about the origin of the ship's name. And now we're in this like hide and seek game of Jess 1 and Jess 2. Jess then sees the bloody message that's on the mirror in room 237. And then after she runs out of that room, she spots Downey's body in the water. So as she's like running around the ship, she runs into Victor and she's trying to explain what's going on. Of course, Victor thinks that she's cuckoo. And she tries to show him Downey's dead body that was supposedly floating in the water, but now, of course, it's not there. So as I said, Victor thinks that she's crazy. Jess is trying to explain it to him, and she starts pushing him, and then she accidentally pushes him into the wall, and on this wall, there's like a hook that goes into the back of Victor's head. So this would explain how Jess 1 killed Victor in the first time loop that we saw by pushing her finger into a hole in the back of his head that she had caused. Jess then runs away from the wounded Victor, and we hear the conversation from earlier about how Greg is telling Jess 1 that everything is all in her head and that ships don't just magically appear out of nowhere. She's then in like the bowels of the ship, and this is where she discovers dozens of the shooter's outfit. She finds several shotguns in a closet and a note saying to kill them all when they board, and it's written in her own handwriting. She then is starting to hear all of her thoughts repeat themselves inside of her own head, basically saying, kill them when they get on board. She also at one point gets her locket caught in a grate, and then she looks into this grate and there are dozens of this locket, same ones over and over again, just like piled on top of each other. This would mean that she has gone through this time loop over and over again without even realizing that she's doing it. So Jess 2's mission is to change the pattern. And she grabs a shotgun, and we get this like really cool scene of Jess 2 confronting Jess 1. And Jess 2 telling Jess 1, you're not me. While Victor is like off in the corner, like almost dead, and is probably just like, what is going on? Jess then hears a shotgun go off, and she's back in the theater with yet again another dead Greg and Downey and Sally. But this time Jess 2 shoots at the other Jess that is up on the balcony, shooting at them, and she does managed to hit this other Jess in the head. Not killing her, but definitely wounding her. Jess 2 is just continuing to try to change the pattern, and she runs back to Victor, and then she hears more gunshots. Downey is then shooting at the wounded Jess that we saw on the balcony, and this Jess convinces them by taking off the burlap sack that she is the real Jess and to follow her and everything's gonna be fine. And at this part of the film, I wanted to be like, guys, Jess is in different clothing. Like, you have to assume that that's not the real Jess. Either way, Jess 3 gets them into room 237, and she slices Downey's throat, and she stabs Sally and wounds her. But Sally is able to get away for a little bit. So Jess 2, who we've been following this whole time, is now running after wounded Sally. And this is when we realize that the distress call that Greg heard in the beginning of the film was actually Sally. Jess 2 then follows Sally up to the deck, and we see Sally walking backwards into a sea of a dozen dead Sallys. This was probably my favorite part of the film because I just was not expecting it. And it just showed once again how many attempts that Jess has gone through to try to change the pattern to get back to her son. Jess then sees Jess 1 fighting with evil Jess 3, and then evil Jess 3 falling overboard. Sally then dies, and we hear yet again the yelling of Greg, Downey, Sally, Victor, and another copy of Jess stuck on the overturned yacht. Jess then realizes that once the previous copies have died, that new copies return. Now we have a very, very, very desperate Jess really trying to figure out this time loop and just get home. She then sets everything into motion. We find out that Jess was the one who actually wrote that bloody message on the mirror in room 237. Telling everybody to go to the theater, and that she was the one who put Downey's body in the ocean, and she's the one that tells the now third copy of Downey and Sally to go to the theater. She then puts on the shooter's outfit, and she wears the burlap sack, and then we hear the conversation again between her and Greg that everything in Jess's world right now is made up. We also have the scene where Jess kills Greg, and she tells him, "We are out on the yacht, and once I kill you, we will return." And she's wearing the sack on her head because she wants Greg to know that this is not the real me. The real me is on the yacht with you. Jess's plan now is to quickly kill these third set of copies so that she can go down and tell the fourth set of copies not to get on to the ship. But then we see that Jess is thrown overboard, which is what we saw earlier in the initial chase scene when we didn't realize that it was the other Jess. So then Jess awakens and she realizes that she is on the shore side and it is still the same Saturday morning. She somehow makes her way back home, and we see that Jess is not the mom that we were under the assumption that she was this entire film. She's actually very abusive and mean to her son Tommy. So of course, seeing herself act this way and going through everything that she just went through, she vows to herself that she is not going to be the mother that she has been this entire time. And she distracts Jess by ringing the doorbell, which we saw in the beginning of the film, and then she goes into the shed in the backyard, grabs a hammer, and kills the original Jess. She then puts Jess's body into a bag and into the trunk of their car, and she leaves with Tommy, telling Tommy that everything is going to be better now. Oh, also, Tommy witnessed Jess 3 killing the original Jess. And it brings us back to the beginning of the film where Jess is comforting a scared Tommy, telling him that bad dreams sometimes make you see things that you haven't. So while the two are driving on their way to dispose of the original Jess's dead body, a seagull hits their windshield. So Jess stops the car and she gets out to dispose of the dead seagull. And when she does this, she sees a pile of dead seagulls. And this is when she realizes that she is still stuck in this time loop. Another thing to note is that there is a marching band that is across from where Jess is, and they are playing the song Anchors Away, which is a song that was played on the old record player on the ship. Jess then gets back in the car and, trying hurriedly to get to safety, she collides with a truck. And her and Tommy are both killed on impact. So in the aftermath of the accident, we see that Jess is standing off to the side, watching the entire scene. A taxi driver then approaches her and looks at Tommy, and he says nothing can ever bring him back. And he offers Jess a ride, to which she accepts, and she says that she wants to be taken to the harbor. After she promises to return, she joins the entire group again on Greg's yacht, starting the entire loop again, evidently and hoping so to bring her son back. Confusing, I know. I had to watch the film twice to kind of pick up on all the little Easter eggs and all the little clues. First, of course, is the name of the ship is called the Triangle. So my first thought was like, duh, the Bermuda Triangle, right? So the Bermuda Triangle, also known as the Devil's Triangle, is located in the western region of the North Atlantic Ocean. This area is where a number of aircrafts and ships are said to have disappeared under mysterious circumstances. And this area is, of course, where the group is traveling on their yacht trip. But I think that this was a decoy. I think Christopher Smith wanted us to think it had something to do with the Bermuda Triangle, but I think it had something more to do with the Greek mythology and purgatory. So purgatory is a place or state of suffering inhabited by the souls of sinners who are being forced to atone for their sins. So to add more weight to the story, remember when the group was discussing the Greek mythology that I told you about? And the story of Sisyphus, who was punished in the underworld by the god Zeus, who forces him to roll a boulder up for eternity, and every time he nears the top of the hill, the boulder rolls back down. I mean, hello, Jess is being forced to relive the events on board the ship over and over and over again. Every time we think that she's onto something, it all crumbles back down and she's back at the bottom of the hill. Okay, so this is what I think happened. Jess and Tommy die in a car accident while on the way to Greg's yacht. I think Jess was probably yelling at Tommy and wasn't paying attention, and then she collided with the truck and then they both died. If you remember in that final scene with the car accident, Jess is in the same dress as the beginning of the film. And the head wound she has matches Evil Jess 3's wound. And remember that I mentioned that the band was playing Anchors Away? I think Jess is now stuck in this eternal purgatory, and she believes that she's a good mom, and she can't come to terms with the fact that she is not at all. So her sole duty throughout this entire film is to get back to her son to prove that she is a good mom. And I don't really have an explanation of like the 8:20 on her watch and then the 8:20 on the clock in the ship. What I am thinking is that might have been the time when Jess and Tommy died in real life, like 8:20 in the morning. And in her purgatory, there are elements of the real world, like the song that's playing and the seagulls that follow Jess the entire film. So going back to Greek mythology, remember the taxi driver that I mentioned? I think that he was represented by Charon, who is the ferryman of the river Styx. When the souls of the dead arrived, Charon was waiting to ferry them across to judgment in Hades, which is the god of the dead and king of the underworld. But I think the taxi driver also might have represented death. If you remember from the conversation about the ship, Sisyphus made a promise that he couldn't keep. So when Death, aka the taxi driver, said, "Are you coming back?" she said, "Yeah, I promise." But she didn't keep her promise. Ultimately, there is no solution of this ship. There is no right way to get out of this time loop. The only way for Jess to solve this is to admit that she wasn't a good mother and then be judged for what she did and how she treated Tommy. But as you can see at the end of the film, that she has still not come to terms with any of that. So why didn't Jess remember all of her copies and her time loops? I think it has to do with the fact that she would fall asleep on Greg's yacht. If you remember, when she wakes up, she can't really remember anything. She just knows that she had a nightmare. And once she wakes up, she seems happier, a little bit lighter, and almost sort of confused as to where she is and how she got there. There is also this foreshadowing conversation that she has with Greg when he asks her about Tommy. She says, "Everything is the same. Every day is the same. If I do one thing differently, I lose him." I really, really liked this film a lot and knew that when everybody died in the first loop except for Jess, that something was going on. The movie played on the themes of regret, remorse, and wanting a second chance to make things right. And the director said it took him 2 years to write this script, which is not surprising considering how complex that it gets. It reminded me of a very long episode of Black Mirror or The Twilight Zone. And Melissa George did just such a great job in her role as Jess. She was able to get between these really disturbing, weird, numb characteristics that just made it so convincing to just be on her side and root for her and want her to figure it out. And I mean, then you watch the last 10 minutes and you're just oh, well, maybe you belong in purgatory. I think that's why I like this movie so much, is because I was trying to figure out what was going on. And when I did finally figure it out, I was okay. I like that. All right, guys, that's gonna be it for this video. My camera is blinking at me that the battery is low and it's about to die. So let me know in the comments if you like this movie, if you watched it, and I'll see you guys soon. Bye, subscribe, comment, do all those things. Okay, bye.